Bona tarda, ja comencem amb el segon dia del programa.
All right. Okay, so we're going to start the second day of the open program, which is dedicated to air, a very wide concept that is at the crossroad for any scientific or artistic discipline. We are wondering here what is real and what is not. And the interpretation of a schedule in outside in reflects the space that will become real. And actually, the being that inhabits the dancer will have to use the force of imagination to overcome interferences. So this film is a collaboration between the dancer and the choreographer with the photographer Petrus Šović. And now we're going to move to another topic. The introduction of an intangible architecture. And we're going to analyze this topic with Miquel Adrià, who will tell us about his project Arquine, but I don't want to spoil anything. I will let him talk about this. Miquel Adrià is an architect by the Technical School of Architecture in Barcelona, and he is doctor in architecture by the European University in Madrid. In 1994, he moved to Mexico, and he is an architect, but he is also a professor and a critic. He's published many different works on architecture, both in Mexico and Latin America. He is the director of the Centro Architecture School in Mexico, as well as Metrópoli. And we can underline the contemporary architecture. This is one of his books, Mario Pani, 10 by 10, 100 architects and 10 critics, White Mountains, Chilean architecture, The Shadow of the Crow, Mexican architects following the path of Le Corbusier, and many other works. Actually, he has a very wide production of books and publications. But not only this, he's also been the editorial advisor in Domus 2020. And he is part of the Consultative Council of the Franz Mayer Museum in Mexico. And he's been member of the Scientific Committee of Architecture in Seoul, 2021. And he's the jury as well, member of the jury of the biennial 20 AO on architecture and urban planning. So we're going to listen to him right now. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you to RCR. Thank you for this invitation. And thank you to Bunka as well. To me, this invitation is a great opportunity to meet again, to see each other again. And actually, that's how you make friends, actually, with this kind of spontaneous encounters or not so spontaneous encounters. Sometimes there are pandemics in between. Sometimes we can see each other more often, because it's true that we met in Athens a few weeks ago. I hope that you can listen to the translation properly. I know that there are people here from different origins, so I will try not to speak too fast so that the interpreter can follow. Thank you very much. That's very much appreciated. And, well, I will basically speak about architecture. But architecture understood as the construction of something which is intangible. It's the construction of a culture around architecture. And this is something that we've been doing for over 25 years. When I decided to move from Barcelona to Mexico, I was rethinking about what the role of an architect was. I mean, was it useful to keep the role that I had learned thanks to fantastic professors that I had at the University of Barcelona? But was that the role that I really wanted to follow? I mean, the role of an expert who will give answers to predetermined questions. For instance, a program of a house with 3 bedrooms and 2 car parks. And, you know, the architect that knows about these answers knows how to do. He knows how to organize the space, how to keep it warm, how to avoid any kind of water leaking in, and so on and so forth. And I thought that this was the most prevalent role of architecture, but it was not the only role that an architect can have. So I started to imagine a different scenario where the architect could become a strategist, so that the architect could incorporate some kind of criticism and the possibility to reflect on other works, your own works or other people's works. So I thought that it was like going beyond the simple fact of providing questions and answers, and I think it was like going beyond academia as well. So that's how I understood architecture. So now we're going to see fundamentally this side of architecture that stems from criticism, and it stems from voices, from screams, actually. I started screaming, yelling, and now I have lowered down my voice, and I have lowered down the bar of my assertions. I'm starting to be more reflexive and more cautious. But to me, critic, is part of the conception of architecture, and it allows us to build a dialogue and a way to move forward. So that's how the construction of a critic platform of architecture started. A platform that is based, and this is a quotation from Beatriz Colomina, and actually she presented a more extended version of the quotation. But anyway, Beatriz Colomina says that the history of the media in architecture is much more than a footnote in the history of architecture. Magazines and galleries help determine that history. They invent movements, they create trends, and they launch international figures promoting architects from the unknown to the known. So the history is built that way. And here, one of the points that I was wondering about since the very beginning, and since I read a publication that we initiated in 1997, and I thought, well, at the time, you know, we were very little, and the point at the time was do we have to inform or do we have to generate content? I mean, our function is not only to inform, but also to generate content and to provoke reflection. This is what building culture and architecture is about. And I think that there are certain publications which are key to me. Some of them have a very short life, like Das and Dere, only maybe 2 or 3 issues. But this would be the starting point to establish a critical position. And actually a position that is antagonist to the reality that was prevailing in Vienna at that time, at the time of this magazine. Actually, it was a reality that was almost captured by a series of architects in Vienna, of Ulrich, Kopnan, Wagner, who were dictating how architecture had to look like. And then comes this magazine that questions everything and that says why. So to what extent do we need to be like this? And why is architecture just an ornament? What for? And here we become aware of the power that a publication can have. And another reference is the reference of the French purism with this magazine that is led by Le Corbusier. And here we're saying that, with the title, it says everything, actually. It's about a new spirit. I mean, the old spirit is over. We need to find this new spirit. And what is the new spirit about? So that's what is interesting. And actually, with Jose, we were speaking not so long ago, and we were talking about what happened at the Biennial of Venice that we visited not long ago. And we were saying that there were lots of complaints, of lots of feelings of guilt, but very little proposals. And actually, what is interesting here in this magazine is that there is a proposal. With this new spirit, we can reach a better world, and this is the hypothesis of modernity. And during that phase of purism, actually, Le Corbusier, with very little works, he understood that publishing was even more powerful than the work itself, because publishing allowed to explain the 5 principles of modernity and purism. And then, well, we realized that there are other realities, other functionalisms, and other styles. Now, for this publication, which was had a longer life than Das Andere, well, we can see that with the Esprit Nouveau, we're trying to see what was good, what was not good. I mean, there was this activism within the magazine and within their critical position. And from that perspective, and in a very humble way, in 1997, we started a project made of projects. Actually, I have to say that this sentence had been used by Vittorio Magnago Lampugnani, who was the director of Casabella. I mean, there was this fascination about what was being done. And of course, originally, this had the form of a magazine, actually. But this was actually irrelevant, because what mattered was the content. And the content was aimed at becoming a construction of ideas. But it was always, a project made of projects. It was a plural project. It was a project that would make subjectivity prevail, and the author was also prevailing, and that's how I had to invent some pseudonyms, because I wanted this to be plural, to have a plural perspective, and we were not so many. So the idea was to see the world that was, and everything that was happening from Mexico, but the idea was not to set a magazine on Mexican architecture. I mean, everybody sees the world from their own perspective. My friends see the world from Olot, and they see with a lot of precision what is going on here, not far away, and they see what is going on a little further away. But when they're projecting a project for Dubai, of course, they have another point of view. So one person belongs to the place where he or she lives and works and decides to see the world. So this is where they will belong. And from there, he can build a kind of point of view. So I think that the critical point of view has a lot to do with the site where we are placed and from where we can see other things and take positions. So, well, with Arquine, we have published over 100 issues, actually, and obviously the magazine has evolved with time, and this magazine is deliberately imperfect. Imperfection is something that we have to vindicate since the very beginning of any project. And here comes another comparison, and I would like to insist that I do not want to compare myself with other magazines from which I have learned a lot. For instance, Arquitectura Viva, which is a perfect magazine. Everything fits and everything is perfect. But it is so perfect that nothing can evolve, and the authors are so good that nothing is renovated. And the pictures are so well framed and positioned that they remain the same. But for us, well, we have been learning, and this is something that we want to keep. It's the condition of the amateur, who keeps learning from their own mistakes. And now we are at number 100 issue, and we wanted to see what kind of perspective should architecture have. Do we have to see architecture from our point of view, from the climate crisis, from the place where we stand? There are some axes which were not there in the past and have been incorporated, and I'm sure that in some years we will have to review this and we will see what kind of points are interesting. And then we understood, and this was no visionary exercise, but we understood that the container or the support was not something minor. But it was, just a support, and there were many other supports that were possible, and each support has their own virtues. I mean, it's like shoes. Certain shoes allow you to run, and certain shoes allow you to hike, or certain shoes are smarter, and then they're suitable for a cocktail party. So we understood what kind of support we needed. And there were many other supports that you will know about, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, that have allowed us to reach a much broader community. And also there are some key moments which are just closer to the participant. There's this program that is broadcasted and for the last 11 years, and here we have Andrea Griborio, and this allows for a much closer relationship. It's 1 hour on Monday with different architects so that they can talk about what they want to do and how they understand the world and the projects that matter to them. The idea is that this construction does not end here, and we think that edition in itself is a critical action, and it is part of that construction of architecture. The book is a space to which you can come and go to find ideas with a different temporality. And here we're talking about temporality. We have discovered that trimestral magazine does not make any sense if you want to communicate new things. So we've seen that there are much more immediate channels like YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. But we also understand that a certain way to set a precedent is not by issuing a trimestral publication. It has to be an autonomous publication that is not determined by a very strict period of time. So that's why the book is so interesting. We understood about the importance of a book, the importance of the book historically as well, and we started building that path. And actually, if we look behind, we see the importance of certain books in the history of architecture. I'm sure that you know the treatise of Vitruvius or the 4 books of Adrià Palladio. How many people know Adrià Palladio? Good, well done. It's a very good average. Andrea Palladio did a few houses, and they were good. They were in the middle of the country, as well as churches in Venice. But he also wrote these 4 books, and these 4 books made his architecture become the trigger, 150 years later, of the reposition of London in the world. London at that time became the capital of the world. We have the British Empire, the Commonwealth, that turned that muddy city and foggy, smoky city, they turned it into a great capital. And actually, this capital used those 4 books with Wren, with Inigo Jones, to set how its cathedrals, parliaments, buildings had to look like. And here's the strength of some of these books. And then, 100 years later, in the United States, an architect becomes the president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. And we see that, again, he takes the information and he is inspired by the 4 books from Andrea Palladio so that he can build a narrative and understand how the buildings representing the institutions of the United States had to look. And he designed the university himself. And then Le Corbusier understood the power of books as a driver for change, for transformation. Actually, there's an anecdote that Le Corbusier has published in those books that I saw there in the library, and I do have some of those books as well. There are always certain books that we preserve. But anyway, Le Corbusier talks about an anecdote. He shows a project that he made for a Chilean family. And it was the first project incorporating materiality. He draws every single stone. He shows the beams, which are made of wood. But that project was never executed, but he published about it. And in that publication, which was a bomb, actually, everybody read Le Corbusier at that time, and everybody in architecture. So this allowed certain people like the young Juan O'Gorman from Mexico, who had never left his country. But, you know, he was reading these books, so he built the first modern buildings in Mexico. And then, you know, this design of that house in Chile was read. The project was read by a British architect. So this British architect read a book by Le Corbusier, and he made the same house that Le Corbusier had never built. And then Le Corbusier said, et voilà, so this is what modernity is about. It's about disseminating these ideas so that somebody can execute the project. Le Corbusier understood this very well, but also some other architects Robert Venturi, for example, Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture. Here, he was rethinking about ferocious criticism on architecture, about this prevailing discourse of on how architecture had to be. And then there was postmodernism, like here, Robert Venturi and Aldo Rossi in Europe. And then there's Rem Koolhaas with books like this. He also provoked a big leap forward, a quantic leap forward, because he could leave behind certain steps in a critical manner, and he proposed the change of paradigm, a new way to understand reality and to project reality. And I have tried to learn from all these masters, and I have to say with a lot of humility that, well, we know that this exists and that we have tried to build a history. For instance, with this connection, we start the 21st century with this title, which is a little bit like a wing, and when the 21st century had not yet started almost. So this was like an open call, and we decided on 400, 500 projects in all the country. So this was a call for projects, and there was a committee who selected, and every year some of these works are published, actually. And then this builds a narrative. It builds a history. If anybody wants to review what has happened in Mexican architecture in the 20th century. And here we've got Fernanda Canales and her book, and she collects what has been built, what hasn't been built, what has been projected but never built, and who were the great artists who participated in this, and how the architectural narrative is transformed during that century. Or specific projects, which are also interesting, like this project from Andrea Gregorio, with a very interesting school, actually. Maybe it's not the best. If you see the ranking of the different schools in the world, there are many schools in Switzerland which are up the ranking, but there's no Latin American school. There's a Catholic school of Chile, but there's none of them in the top 50 schools. And there's this provincial school with less resources. However, they do something unique and original. And this is why it is so interesting, and this is why we wanted to reflect on this. We wanted to see what was original there, and then we started becoming more familiar about how they build landscape, and then how the architect becomes close to society, and then the architect is not a haute couture designer, but rather a person who's close to society. And this other example here on Latin American architecture, to understand a little bit better what is going on there. You know, in those years where in Europe and in the States, architecture was almost collapsing because of the 2008 economic crisis. So we see that in Latin America, there's a crisis as well, but this happens all the time in Latin America. So one more crisis didn't make such a difference. And we saw that there was an architecture that was executed with a lot of wisdom and with maybe less resources. So we wanted to review this and to publish on this. And then we had the opportunity to to see the works of RCR. So these inspiring works, which are the drawings that suggest and that allow to those persons who see them to think that, you know, to think whatever they want, because these drawings are suggestions and they're open, opposite to what we see in many different studios, where the image is the final aim, the final goal. It's almost like a porn image because everything is so obvious. Whereas here, in this publication, well, this publication invites the reader to imagine. It is very open. And also some other books that I have seen with the influence of Le Corbusier in Mexican architecture. This appears in La Sombra del Cuervo. And then there's one of the most extraordinary architects in Mexico, Teodoro González, as well as many other architects in Peru, Chile, Mexico, or younger architects, MMX, or very well-known architects, Alejandra Aravena, Elemental, or other architects with, like Francisco Serrano, Pancho Serrano, other emerging architects, Al Borde, at the edge. And the title says, less is all. And we realized that we had no budget to make a book, and actually we made this book with a very little budget, and actually the cover is just a piece of paper. And with very little resources, we could express the work of these young Ecuadorian architects. Here we have also the translation of some titles which are quite interesting, like Somos Humanos, Are We Human? Some other architects here which are interesting, Avalos, Iñaki Avalos, Renata Sienkiewicz, Barclay Cruz in Peru, Flores y Prats, Pensado a Mano. This allows to see from Mexico, from that elevated point of view, this other point in the world which seem relevant, not only in Latin America, but also in other places like Spain or Italy. And some more recent books, after 5 years of a lot of work, we have this monography of the work of Alberto Calach, who is one of the most interesting Latin American architects, and a little book that I wrote in order to share a few strategies for re-densification, urban re-densification, understanding that this should be key in what we have to do as architects. Maybe here somebody will have the chance to build an airport or a shopping mall or a center in Mars. But what is real is that this planet needs housing. We need housing for people who do not have access to housing, and we can participate in this project. And very often we need immediate solutions so that we can reach this goal, so that we can achieve this goal. So I collected a few ideas that I wanted to share on this topic, to share this with communities so that this can become like a kind of immediate manual for implementation. And some of the ideas in here are ideas from the past, actually. Also some other authors, Loreta Castro, Bilbao, and another recent book that was published recently. We wanted to see what happens, because, you know, architects, well, we think that we work for the space, you know, we have to limit and define the space. But actually, we also work with time, and we tend to forget about this. So we wanted to rescue works that had been built in the last 25 years, and we wanted to see how these pieces of work had resisted the passage of time. And we also wanted to invite 25 different authors so that they could write a text that would provoke questions on the matter. Another important aspect that we find interesting is the idea of equality, equal opportunities. Architects have the responsibility to ask ourselves questions. And a way to provide answers is by being candidate to tenders, to contest. And in Mexico, there's no contest. And actually, you know, in Mexico, the outgoing president says a few words about the incoming president. And he just dictates who the new president will be. And the same goes for architecture. In Mexico, there are no contests, and every project is delivered to the nephew of somebody else. And I know that this is another topic, but we should all have equal opportunities to express new ideas. So in this regard, we have rescued some key moments in history. And I don't know if you're able to see what kind of projects we're talking about here. This is a contest for the Chicago Tribune building. This was a very important tender in the 20s, and many different architects from around the world participated. It was very well disseminated, and some architects participated. Some of them were very well known, like Alpha Loos. Also, others here, Ludwig Hilvesheimer, who was the author of a book on urban planning, Die großen Stadt, the big city. And in the end, what ended up being built is quite irrelevant because nobody remembers who it was. It was neo-Gothic, so it was somehow a step behind, but this context triggered a few ideas, and modernity was unveiled there. I mean, and this was projected, so it meant that, yes, it could be done. And what about this other contest? Do you know what this is about? This was the proposal of the contest, in which a few young people, Richard Rogers and Grant Sopiano, made this proposal. And I think that at this contest there were 500 different offices participating, but there was a jury, and this is very important actually. Actually, this is a piece of advice that I'm giving you. When you are going to participate in a contest or tender, you have to see who is part of the jury. This is the relevant issue. So in this case, there was John Couvet, who understood this proposal by these young, provocative architects who were trying to suggest their free-flowing structure. And, well, depending on the needs of every program, well, they would see how this would evolve, and all the equipment would be brought to that perimeter. Any Mexican people in the room? No. Now, this is the result of international contest which was very well organized. 2006 for the parliament. And here, in this case, 2004, and Alberto Calach got it. It was very disputed also in the final with Chipperfield. And actually, he understood that the best idea was a good section, and that this project had to be extruded and replicated in the surface that it covers. So they understood the factor of space, but also the factor of time, because what's important here about the library was not the service provided to citizens, but rather the emergency and the rush that the politician wanted, because he wanted to open the library right before the election. But since the idea of the contest seemed relevant to us, since 1999, we started calling for a contest ourselves. And this is what we've done in the last 10 years, a contest for a pavilion that will be built with little resources. There's a certain amount that we can provide and also a possibility to add sponsors, but this has to be built like a facility that will allow citizens to participate. And somehow they can understand the city in a different way. We think that this is an opportunity to open a window and to see an extraordinary city in the 4 days where the event is taking place. So there are these spaces, these tables actually, where you can exchange ideas and create a bond with citizens. There are spaces for playing, for participation. Here we have Peter Sumter, but also, well, other encounters with citizens who are participating and enjoying the city. Or even during the pandemic, certain pavilions that we built. But eventually, during the pandemic, you couldn't be with other people, but here you could dance with your own shadow. Certain people have found a place to live, so there's this ephemeral architecture. And this kind of architecture has survived many years. And there are these other examples, like this one from this year. This is the proposal to replicate one of the most sacred spaces of Mexican architecture. This is a terrace in a house. And well, this architect proposes a replica of this terrace, of this space, but it's not a private space anymore. It's a public space, free, open terrace that will be placed in a park where everybody can go, that everybody can enjoy, and, well, everybody can do whatever is allowed in the public space. And we think that this construction of architecture can be achieved through exhibitions, exhibiting and sharing architecture. Architecture, built architecture, has the vocation to be seen and lived in 3 dimensions, to be recovered. And actually, I have to say that even in those cases, it's very difficult to get an idea of the whole. You're here for a month, and probably you will be able to know about the work by RCR. But for somebody who's not from here, it is very difficult to access all this information. Maybe a person from Barcelona will know about the library, or maybe somebody will know about the Musée Soulage in France, but sometimes, it's difficult to concentrate the whole of work in a very compact manner. So that's why exhibitions are so important, because they allow to concentrate this work. For instance, in this case, we're talking about an exhibition of this team of architects in Singapore, and also, well, these architects from Latin America, MMX from Mexico, Dominic Pagot, and the project to propose a strategic change of La Cité in Paris for 2040, or David Chipperfield here, or this idea on how to transform the cities related to water. This is by Loretta Castro, Tatiana Bilbao. And we always think that these exhibitions, together with books and publications, are tools to get closer to this intangible conception of architecture. We also thought, since the year 2000, that a very good way to keep learning is by establishing a dialogue, by joining different voices which tell us about interest, about ideas, and this generates an accelerator for neurons, actually. It's an opportunity to trigger ideas. It's an opportunity to discuss, not always to agree. I mean, getting a consensus is not the point here. It's just to trigger this acceleration of neurons. It's architecture as a field that provides dialogue and critic thinking. And it's something that existed already. Here I'm giving you the example of certain events from 1926. This is an event organized at a private house, and the lady here is joining different architects so that they can speak about the world and they can discuss. And you can see in the picture Le Corbusier as well as other figures of modern architecture of those years. And they kept meeting, and they met as well in modern international congresses on architecture. And then there's this other picture of a trip to Athens in 1923, where the Charter of Athens was drafted, this manifesto focusing on housing. Again, in this case, we have lots of important architects, important figures of architecture. And here, in 1947, we see another gathering, and Le Corbusier is again separated from the center. Le Corbusier was somehow collaborating with the government of Vichy during the Second World War, so he is put a little bit aside. He's not in the center anymore. But there's Joseph Juissert and some other architects in a strategic position. Sert had worked with Le Corbusier, and Harbert was commissioning one of the works that Le Corbusier would build later on in America. And then there's Gropius in this central position as well. You know, anyway, it's these are gatherings to discuss. I mean, nobody is there to keep everything secret. The idea, the intention of these gatherings, of these meetings, was to build ideas, to propose, to reach consensus, or not. And in this regard, through years and years, there's this Congress, the Arquine Congress on Architecture. And There's also a festival on architecture, Mextropoli. And this also was the occasion to organize these events, these gatherings, these dialogue tables, to recognize this extraordinary condition of certain cities. And we have had extraordinary conferences by Reinhard de Hart, who is collaborating with Ramcolas, to tell us that the 20th century did not exist. Or RCR, who questioned the resistance of the attendance with the conference that led the audience vibrant and enthusiastic. Or here, the conference of Peter Sumton, which was full of controversy and discussion. So again, this was not conferences aimed at pleasing people, but rather the opposite, questioning things. So what really mattered was the construction of a dialogue. But also there are smaller formats where we can see cinema and architecture or documentaries related to architecture.
Y bueno, pandemia de por medio, ya el año pasado.
And well, there was a pandemic, and last year we resumed with a lot of energy, and this year in September we will also have 4 intense days of discussion and roundtables and conferences. And actually today we have some other conferences here which have been confirmed, but you can see here the names. And this again is just to trigger thought and reflection. Finally, in Arquine, throughout the years, we have built the magazine Arquine with international contests, over 250 published books. So I guess that we are the first editorial in Spanish language, even though we also publish in English. And we have this community of followers in social media, as well as some members of academia. So this construction of an intangible architecture and an architecture that tries to build this critical platform from the generation of content with this project made of projects, understanding edition as an act of critic, provoking questions, trying to expose answers, but not unique answers, just open answers, the capacity of sharing ideas and having different answers that will allow us to discuss and to move forward and to move towards other questions, having the power to exhibit and to share architecture and to congregate and dialogue in these gatherings like the one we're having today. So all that from that platform that we created, Arquine and Mextropoli. Thank you very much. Well, if you have questions, if you have any question, now's the time. Hello and congratulations for the conference. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this perspective that you have on architecture. My question, talking about something intangible, we are at the moment of a huge change. And the world of edition and publishing, I mean, we've lost this. It's the world of physical books. Lots of publishers have collapsed or succumbed. And I would like to know what the situation is in Arquine. I mean, there are 250 books published, physical books, in a moment where this is changing a lot. So I would like to know your opinion. And how do you see the future of these tangible and physical books? Because we are here at the transition. Yes. This is a question that we make ourselves continuously. Well, sometimes we see that with a certain panic, maybe not so much during the pandemic, but when the social media erupted, we thought that everything would become virtual. And we even thought that e-books would replace books. We've seen in international fairs in Frankfurt, in the international exhibition of the US in Guadalajara as well, we see that paradoxically, more books than ever are published today. Some of them with less issues, or less copies. But there are certain books which are very comfortably transformed into e-books, like books with a lot of text, or school books that are almost all replaced by digital books. However, books on architecture, well, I don't know if they will last or not, but they're doing pretty well right now because they propose a different experience. It's the experience of seeing well-printed pictures. And I see that you're very well surrounded, and I'm sure that Gisao Suzuki will agree that it's not the same, to having a good print or or seeing something tiny in the mobile phone. And also the experience of opening a page and the experience of the smell and the lightness. The books that we want to make are multi-sense experience. It's not only information that we receive, it's also a proposal that comes from the way we do these architectures, the architectures that we publish. Last week we published, and we presented actually in MACBA here in Barcelona, a book on the different tools for the general architect. And actually, this raised a lot of interest. And lots of people came because it was just like a manual. It was a tool. It was a tool, and maybe one day it will become a digital tool, but at the time, right now, it's just another tool. You know, whenever we have had another medium, there's always this fear of the new medium replacing the old one. We had the same with television replacing radio, also the different supports in music. All of a sudden, I mean, there are no vinyls, and there's Spotify, but you can keep collecting vinyls, so you can have another kind of experience. So in the field of academia, also we're quite afraid right now of what will happen with ChatGPT and artificial intelligence. But we see, on the other hand, that many schools keep drawing by hand. So I think that it's better not to be the victim of fear. I think that any support will adapt and will become compatible with other supports. And for instance, there's the book, and the book is cellulose, and this means that we're going to lose trees, and we're losing trees in the Amazonian forest because we're publishing books in Germany. I mean, it's not such a straightforward relationship. I'm sure that the books in Germany are made from recycled paper or recycled forest. We have just published a book which does not use cellulose or water. I mean, there are other supports that allow to perpetuate this experience. And actually, you know, for those who have accumulated historical archives, you know, we know that certain projects that had been kept in a floppy disk or in a CD, you know, we thought they were lost, but we can somehow recover many things. So I would say that new technologies will come up, but this does not mean that the art book will be lost, because it offers experiences that we do not have with other media. But well, we shall see. Any other question? Yeah. I have two questions. One of them is related to what you just said right now, if there's this moment of crisis with the publication of books, because we think about this new generation. We have grown up with the immediate information, and for us, going to get a book, well, it seems like somehow it's a kind of second reference, and I would say that maybe this is the real crisis, and not so much the printing, but rather this. So I don't know, this made me think. And the second question or reflection is, have you considered to publish about a person who is not an architect but who reflects on architecture? Because I think that there are lots of people in history who reflect about domestic space and many other issues, and they're not architects, and sometimes we do not know about them from schools of architecture. So I don't know if you've thought of this. Okay, I'll start with the second one. Yes, we have published and we are interested. Now, from that elevated point of view, we are trying to focus on architecture, but in a cross-cutting manner. And yes, we have published books. For instance, there was this book called Architecture with No Architects from an artist who works on virtual spaces that a community in Colombia creates. And he describes this like a series of threads to build terraces in houses and rooftops in houses. I mean, and this person has different readings which have nothing to do with the mainstream architecture. And yes, we are interested in this because it's fundamental to consider architecture as a cross-cutting issue. And now, regarding the generation which has not read books and how inconvenient could be to go and find the book, because if you have Google, what would the point be? Of course, it's difficult to go get a book. And it's true that sometimes you ask people and they say, yeah, I do not read. And well, if you don't read, you're not missing anything. But if you read, you can discover lots of universes. I have also calculated other things. We have millions of books available. And if you are an eager reader, you will read 3,000 books in your life. And this is keeping a very good pace. And of course, architecture books are quicker because there's a lot of pictures. But then how do you choose the books that you read? And the key point is how to break this. Because again, if you don't read, well, you're not missing on anything. But you don't have the possibility to explore other universes. Well, this is a risk to take. It's like going to the cinema. Why go to the cinema if you can see everything in your TV set or in your mobile phone? But maybe you will discover other universes, other formats. Or maybe you will see, you will discover. But books lead you to places that were not part of your imagination. There are other universes. And there they are, and there's the possibility that somebody may read that in a digital format or in a physical format. There's always an opportunity. In statistical terms, I don't have the data now, but I know that there are very fast tools to obtain information, but this is not the same as reading. And today, more books are produced than ever. That's because people buy them, otherwise this would not be possible. And during decades and centuries, most of the people did not read and nothing happened, but some people read and they were able to transform things. But well, this is something that I wonder myself, and I hope that my son will get the message. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was not clear to me what a book is, what a magazine is. I mean, do you only publish books or? And my question is, how do you read a book on architecture or a magazine on architecture? How do you read this? There are no silly questions, there are silly presentations, and maybe my presentation was clumsy. Magazines are periodical publications, like semestrial publications in our case. And this allows for a structure that tells the reader that is going to find another issue every 3 months or every so many months. But a book has another temporality. And it can be theme book or it can be only about projects. So this is regarding the difference of formats. And you were asking, oh yeah, how to read those books. Well, Julio Cortázar used to say that his book Rayola, you could read it starting from any page, and then you could make your own order. I am now reading a book that you can start it anywhere you want. I'm a classical person and I start from the beginning, but maybe I'm not too creative. But magazines, I think that you can read them in every sense. And actually, very often I start by the end. And sometimes I find more interesting things at the end. And if I see drawings, that's where I start. But I think that, yeah, any way is possible. Maybe one last question for you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the work that you do. I'm a great consumer of Arquine. We have a little bit of trouble to understand. The sound is not very good. But yeah, I have very good feedback to give about Arquine. Now, regarding the line of communication and regarding architecture in Mexico, how do you see the situation? And yeah, how do you see the situation? There are lots of cities in provinces which are growing with not so much direction towards housing. Maybe there's not enough culture on that. Sometimes engineers tend to give projects, and sometimes it's how do you see the perspective in Mexico towards the inside on the one hand, and how do you see this wave of architects towards the world? Yes, these are two important topics. The first topic is this banal architecture, this ordinary architecture. This is a global phenomenon. And I have no statistics, and I would like to say that statistics, sometimes they're invented. But well, here, in many cities in the world, you have this ordinary perspective, everything becomes exchangeable and everything is of immediate consumption. So actually, this happens very often in places that are far away from culture and that do not give value to culture. So if you have this consumable product with no aggregated value, well, then there's no point in having quality architecture. And if you have this organized architecture which will have an impact on public administration, well, then we will start seeing that if this architecture develops with good context, good architects, it will have a positive impact, and then developers will have a positive impact, and then there will be some added value, and it would be useful for governors because it will place the city in a different position. But if there's no tradition of this kind of culture, well, then the immediate things will prevail and the non-valuable things will prevail. And well, you were referring to author-like architecture. I would say that in Mexico there's a good average architecture. To me, everything looks very much alike, and most architects are just following a couple of lines, and they follow 2 to 3 currents. But what is missing maybe is good labs, good universities, but mostly we're missing proposals. So this is a sweet moment, but it would be the right moment as well to improve the level of quality, which is acceptable right now, but could be better. And there are exceptions, of course. So nothing else?
Primero te quiero dar las gracias por tu conferencia.
I wanted to thank you for your conference. It was very inspiring. And I like how the Arquine project has been adapting from the book, magazine, dissemination activities. And this is a comment that can become a question. Very often, population who does not have access to all this knowledge on architecture, maybe they see that as some kind of topic for the elite. And the idea of metropole is to get all this knowledge closer to the population. I don't know if this is the idea really, but what I see is that, whenever there's a building which is a little bit more contemporary, well, people may think that this has nothing to do with their daily life. Well, I have to say that, yes, we want to reach as many people as possible, but it's never been an obsession. What we wanted was the construction of a culture of architecture, but we tried to go step by step, and we tried to be accessible and affordable to people. I mean, for us, the bond with Chile since the very beginning is fundamental. I think that in Chile and Mexico, you get the best architecture in the American continent. But how to have a magazine that can be remarkable. Well, you have to turn it into a cheaper magazine and a digital magazine. And you can have that instead of a printed magazine, and you can also adapt this to many more formats. If we organize conferences on architects, artists, mayors, cinema makers, and we use this common space to gather people who have nothing in common, actually, and this is a good definition of what happens in cities. Well, you know, in order to fill in a theater, this would be, you know, the only activity that we would ask people to pay for in the Mextropoli Festival. But you can see that for free as well from any place in the world. And at the same time, so actually, this would be the how to consume this. Well, it's about trying to get the best cost and to reach as many people as possible.
Pues muchas gracias, Miquel. Yo creo que
Okay, Miquel, well, I think that, well, we're going to take very good note of what you said. And, well, tomorrow there's more. Thank you very much.